Right, so the first bit, we're going to see a little bit of postal stationery. What I'm showing you is not the boring old postcards, which are a study in themselves, but some illustrated envelopes. These come in sets of 12. They're all different designs. There are 6 twopennies and 6 twopenny halfpennies, and around 315 sets in total were printed. Now, if anybody was keen to have some, they've just missed an opportunity, because there was a complete set of the twopennies and a complete set of the twopenny halfpennies for sale in the Abacus sale at the end of last week. But they're quite difficult. The mint ones come around, quite often. All the Abacus ones were mint examples, but getting them correctly used is quite difficult. So what are we talking about? We're talking, oh dear, we're talking about things which look somewhat like this. There's an example of the twopenny, an example of the twopenny halfpenny, and those are mint ones, of course. Used ones are difficult, but they come, if you like, in 2 classes. There is a set which are genuine used, and there are some which I view, or generally viewed, as philatelic. They're addressed to 56 Elizabeth Street, Hobart, various different people. And it's interesting because they're worth about the same, perhaps a little bit more than the mint ones, but the used, real, genuine used ones are worth about 5 times as much as those so-called philatelically used ones. And I'm pleased to say that about 2 years ago, I managed to achieve my ambition, which was to have an example of every single one of them used. But unfortunately, it still scored 7 philatelic and 5 genuine. But the real genuine used ones don't come up terribly often. But I think it's fair to say these are Christine's favourite example of Tasmanian postal stationery. An odd little one here, but in 1908, the Great White Fleet, the American Great Fleet, paid us, if you like, the nearest equivalent to a state visit to Australia, and they issued special cards. This is a design which is used in in Queensland and in New South Wales and in Tasmania. They come around, they are mint ones, are not too difficult. Again, it's just like the other stationery. Used ones are more expensive, but occasionally, as far as I know, there are only 2 of them recorded. You get a used and uprated one. So they paid, instead of the penny for local usage, they paid a penny halfpenny for overseas usage. And they're very, very difficult indeed. Now, the next little section tells you something about embossed postal stationery. And this is quite a broad-ranging topic, really. The colony itself issued 1 penny and 2penny embossed envelopes, and there were embossing dies for 1 halfpenny, 1 penny, and 2pence. But the post office allowed private embossing, and as you might imagine, philatelists really went to town on this, and they do all sorts of really strange combinations. The other difference, there was a similar system in the UK, but done at Somerset House, but there was no lower limit on the numbers in Tasmania, unlike the one in Somerset House, where you had to have a minimum 500 to do private embossing. So there's an example of the 2penny one, mint and used. It is actually, it looks a bit dark, but it's dark green, and a brighter green was issued with a very similar die in the colony later. And there's the post office notice, which I hope you can all read. And it was done for free. And that's the superintendent of the stamp branch telling you what you can do. And that's the full notice, and then enlargement of the bottom bit, which says you're enabled to do embossing yourselves. A lot of businesses made use of it, and they privately embossed their envelopes for a penny for sending out their invoices and things like that. But you do get some exotic things. This is an example of a bill of a circular notifying people of a sale of one of the big stores, Brownell Brothers. It's interesting because the correct colours are orange for the halfpenny, red for the penny, and green for the twopenny. And you will notice that is embossed in green, but it's actually a penny. So I suspect they might have been trying to pull a fast one on the post office, so they would send those interstate without them getting taxed. So they would not be just restricted to the sale being publicised in Tasmania, but probably also in Victoria and possibly New South Wales as well. So it's interesting because the colour is wrong. Now these are collected fairly widely, and you can get mint envelopes with multiple embossings, anything up to 3 fairly regularly. But there's a couple of examples. A quadruple embossing, and as far as I know there are only 3 of those recorded used, and the quintuple one, which is one of only 2 used. And strangely, it's addressed to somewhere really not too far away from here, because Englefield Green is closer to Christine than to me, but just on the edge of Windsor Great Park. So these are both okay because they actually pay the correct rate. That's 4 halfpennies paying, that's addressed to Parry and Farley, who were stamp dealers in the Strand in Sydney, but this appears to be a genuine one, paying the correct 2 halfpenny rate to the UK. They didn't do any Queen Victoria newspaper wrappers other than privately embossed ones, but for Edward VII they did. And here's 2 council to order examples for the newspaper wrappers. The rate was a halfpenny per newspaper or a penny for overseas. And there are 2 of them council to order. They also did special postcards, 2 different styles, and there are actually 3 variants in total for Edward VII. So that's a little bit about, if you like, the less commonly seen stationery. The next section is a little bit about Port Arthur. It was founded as a timber station in 1830. By 1833, it had become a penal colony. What I have is a selection of postcards which are made of photographs of paintings or engravings, because when 1833 the postcard hadn't been invented. Indeed, Tasmania didn't have any postage stamps. The colony itself had a wide range of facilities, and it employed a novel penal system whereby Governor Arthur tried to rehabilitate his prisoners by teaching them a trade and giving them a good dose of religion, and if they erred, they were really fairly heavily punished. They had what is known as an oubliette, a blind cell where they could be locked up with no light for 24 hours a day. But if they were really bad, they were actually, for a period of time, exiled to Norfolk Island, which was had a separate penal colony there, and that was rather more difficult to escape from. It was difficult enough to get away from Port Arthur, and I'll say a little bit about that in a while. It was closed as a penal colony in 1877, and it was turned. The land was sold off, and buildings were repurposed. The name was changed to Carnarvon, but in the late 1800s, around about 1894, there were a number of fires. It is unfortunately a problem in Tasmania, just as in other parts of Australia, although rather less so because it tends to be rather damper, that they do have fires which can damage the buildings. But its name was changed to Carnarvon, and after a while, there was curiosity about what Port Arthur had been like, and tourism began to develop, and they had day trips from Hobart to visit. And there are a number of other tourist attractions nearby. A little bit more then on Port Arthur. There's a couple of early postcards. One shows Port Arthur in 1830s, and there is, let's get it, there is a governor's house, there's a dock, a church which actually is further up the hill, but they still hadn't built the main penitentiary building, which is this one here. And there's a hospital as well. And on this side, they had a dock where they built ships. And funnily enough, they had some really pretty good craftsmen. And because they had free labor, they were able to produce good ships at competitive prices. And they did extremely well. This is Port Arthur while it was in occupation. And there we are, the hospital, the dock, and the main penitentiary building here. They had a granary and grain store with a bakery in it. So they baked their own bread. Nowadays, round about here, there's a pier from which you can take a trip out round the bay, which is over here on the left. You can see some of it there. They had their own railway, which was convict powered, and I have a little book of somebody making a contemporary visit, and they were met off their ship, and they went on the railway carriage, which is wooden rails and a wooden carriage, and some convicts powered them up to visit the penitentiary. A selection of related things, an officer's gun, some of the chains, and various other things relating to, including rules for prisoners, relating to how it was run. Now, the reason it was secure is that the isthmus on which Port Arthur is built is separated from the rest of Tasmania by this narrow strip of land called Eaglehawk Neck. You can't quite see it behind the trees, but round about there is a guardhouse which housed the soldiers who guarded Eaglehawk Neck. This is a very long beach, actually, and it shows here with the tide in. And over the other side, which is empty at that time, was now a hotel, and underneath that water is a tessellated pavement, which is a tourist attraction nowadays. They did develop the defences to make it more difficult for the prisoners to get away. There are pretty hefty currents on all of these on the bays, but they got some fierce dogs and tethered them on long chains which overlapped, so that if they tried to escape along here, then the dogs could get them. And they even built platforms in the sea, so if the people tried to swim around it, the dogs could still get them. Anybody who died there was buried on the Isle of the Dead, which is out in the bay. And if you visit Port Arthur nowadays, it's optional. You can get off one boat trip, have a little while on the Isle of the Dead looking at the graves, and I think just under 2,000 graves there, and then you can come back on the next ferry. It's a very attractive bay, really quite a nice site for there to be a penitentiary. Now, when it became Carnarvon, they needed a town hall, and this is the building which they use as a town hall. And it always amuses me that it actually used to be the lunatic asylum in the days of the penitentiary. So no change there, really. They have lunatics in charge of the town hall. The beginning of the tourism, and you can see Port Arthur, 2-day trip, 30 shillings, and this is run by Webster Romech, who are a well-established tourism company. This is a horse-drawn charabanc, and when cars came in, they had motorized charabancs instead. So that's early days. You can see they're all togged up and ready to go. Over time, Carnarvon developed, and in 1927, they actually officially changed the name back to Port Arthur, and this is a picture of the Commandant's house, which they turned into a boarding house at 10 bob a day or 50 shillings a week. Unfortunately, Christine has unhappy memories of our visit there, because just about there she slipped down and bashed her knee. But she recovered. She's a game girl. She got up and continued. Now, the next section, I'll say a little bit more. Nowadays, it's the major tourist attraction in Tasmania. Has about 500,000 visitors a year. But it's worth mentioning there was an horrendous incident in there in 1996 when they had a gunman went mad and he killed 35 people, and that's a bit of a shadow of the place, but its security is much greater these days. And actually, as a result of that, gun control in Australia became much stricter. There are a couple of other things which are nearby. One is the blowhole, where there's a hole in the cliffs, and as the water comes in, you get a water spout as it comes through the hole. And the other is Tasman's Arch, which is featured on the Tuppenny Halfpenny pictorial stamp. So that's a little bit about Port Arthur. Next, we've got private letter cards. If you like, these come in two flavours. One of the things that the Tasmanian Post Office was very slow to do was to adopt new things. They had to have private cards issued before they eventually produced postcards, and there was pressure for them to produce letter cards, and privately produced ones were issued by Walsh & Co. in Hobart and the Examiner in Launceston. The private ones come in different layouts and stocks, but there's a couple of used ones, and basically they come in the blue and the cream, but the blue ones come in a number of different styles. And that's a mint one of the one that you saw just now, and it shows the back, and it has a picture on the back. Also got a thing which says the postage rates, which the stamp was covering. But inside there is a letter sheet, and under the letter sheet you get some pictures, and they're on both sides. I didn't want to take the centre bit out so you could see all the pictures, so you get 4 pictures internally and 1 on the back. And you get a variant where you can write on the inside of the card, and you get pictures, 2 of them, on the inside. So there are lots of different varieties there, and these are the ones, just the ones produced in Hobart. I have seen one other one, which unfortunately I got outbid on eBay, and I've never seen another example of that particular type. Lordston, the same purpose, but the format's entirely different. They're produced by the Examiner newspaper people. Sorry, that's what it looks like folded, so it's not too different from the other one. But when it's opened out, it's very different, because you have a letter sheet in the middle and 4 little pictures around the outside. And they fold across into the middle, and then you can fold it up and send it. And that's one opened out, so you can see there's a picture on the back, as well as the stamp space on the front. And these were produced, but then after a while, in support of tourism, they got a little more ambitious. They produced souvenir letter cards, which look like that. They come in various different colours. There's a red one, and inside they have a little leaflet with lots of tourist pictures, and you can see it's printed at the Examiner and Weekly Courier, and that's dated 1905, and it's sponsored by the Tasmania Tourist Association. But this is a typical view. It shows the bridge across Garratt Gorge, and that's the harbour in Lordston. Getting this sort used is very, very difficult, and as far as I know, there are only 2 examples used. I have one of them, but somebody else has got the other one. And this is a private advertising letter card for Slater's Hotel. I thought for a long time I was under the misapprehension that that was the only one. And you can see this is slightly later than colonial period, because it's got a kangaroo stamp franking it. But then I discovered that they come in several different colours. I now have 5, the same card from the same place, but in 5 different colours. Now, that's a little bit about those private letter cards. I have an ill-fated one frame exhibit of that. I put it in the national competition in oh dear, where was it? Birmingham or somewhere like that. And the jury refused to judge it. It was eventually judged as a special study. I was given a reasonable mark and said, please don't exhibit it again. But there we are, these things happen. Railway stamps come in 2 flavours. They have newspaper stamps and parcel stamps. Newspaper stamps on the railway, halfpenny per newspaper, and they had values up to 6pence. But in typical thrifty Tasmanian fashion, if they had, they didn't use the high values, so what they did was they overprinted them 1 penny for later use because they ran out of penny values. Getting them on cover, that's about the best you can do usually. There's only 2 fragments of use on a cover that I've ever seen. And you will note, if you look at this one on the bottom, addressed to a property in the Derwent Valley, and the guard on the train has been told to throw off. So as you travel through the property, you just threw it into the property, a bit like the way that American newspapers seem to be delivered. And that's halfpenny for 1 paper, that's a penny for 2 newspapers. The second thing we talk about is parcel stamps. Railway parcel stamps, and it's only recently been found out from railway documentation, they were originally issued in the 1880s, and they did 3 values: 1 penny, a 3 and a 6. And it took quite a long time to find out what the 1 penny values were for. And eventually it's found out that they were used for returning empty milk churns. But the farmers were up in arms about it because they had to pay a penny for returning empty milk churns, but if you wanted to return beer barrels, they were free. Must be something about the attractions of beer. They had a long-lived design featuring Garratt locomotives, which are the articulated locomotives which they use in Tasmania. They were later replaced by the diesel issue. There was a problem with people perpetrating insurance fraud. I'll say a little more about that later. And eventually they were replaced by a void panel issue, and there were new issues which looked more like bus tickets than anything else after decimalisation. And the first issue, and the Garratt refers to the articulated locomotive on the top, that's the first issue. They're in black. That's most of the values. There are others, but they don't come up. That's all the ones I've managed to accumulate. And you will notice there's a panel at the bottom for the station name. There are pre-printed ones here, Hobart and Launceston. And oh dear, I can't read where the other one is. It's probably Burnley, but it looks too long for that. But it's somewhere else anyway. Now getting them used on cover is difficult, but there's an example where they've been used on a parcel tag. So somebody sent a parcel costing 1 7d, and that's the tag which came off it. Two interesting things about this picture. The first is that it's they found that people were making insurance claims with no basis because the documentation from the railway didn't include appropriate disclaimers. So they had to get the stamps overprinted, and this was not until 1935, that if you bought a parcel and you were sending a parcel, it was subject to the Railway Management Act 1935, and that basically stamped out the fraud in one go. Now, if you look carefully at the ones on these stamps, they're actually a bit of a funny shape. And if you look across, there's actually the remnants of a crossbar there and a funny shape at the top. And they were actually made by taking the 4-penny die, cutting out bits of the 4 and turning it into a penny die to save money. Typical thrifty Tasmanians. Now, I said I'd say something about the obscure bus parcel stamps. And you can see the people who run the buses, just as that coach was, were Webster Romech. I've only ever found one article about these, and they do come in various different values. I think I've got 6p, 9p, a shilling, and 1 and 3. And they were allegedly produced in panes of 12 in little booklets, but I've never seen a pane. This is the only example I've got of a use on cover. It's a fragment of a parcel label with a sticky for going to Franklin from Webster Romech, and that's a 2 and 3p parcel. And just to finish this, a little story, if I may. I did mention that getting railway parcel stamps on cover was difficult. Well, I found some on cover. The unfortunate thing was that they were on a Shell oil crate, and it was only $19.99 on eBay, but the freight even then was going to cost me $70, which is 35 quid, and this is quite a long time ago, in the last century even, to get that oil crate sent to the UK. However, fortunately for me, I was able to buy it and ask a friend to keep it because I was going to visit Tasmania later in the year. So I did so, and I took pictures of the oil crate just to prove that it existed. But when I came home, I brought just the lid of it. So I have genuine use on cover. And just to prove the point, there it is. And thank you for your attention. And that is all I have to say to you today. Thank you.